Hello, I'm just Sir, and, and welcome to episode 13 of the ranking of every movie that I've watched in 2020. Without further ado, let's get into it. Starting with number 10 is Sorry to Bother You, a movie directed by Boots Riley, and we're introduced to this character named Cash, who's a down on his luck character, and he doesn't hasn't really achieved much success in, until he gets this job at this call center. And during this, as a part of this job, he has to go all day talking to clients, and to be successful at his job, he has to disguise himself as his clients he's talking to are may not be as inclined to purchase the product, knowing how the a specific person speaks. And specifically, what Cash does to be successful is he uses a what a quote unquote his white voice, which is voiced by David Cross, to get his point across and sell all these different products. And he's very successful in that. But it comes at a cost of his individuality. And he soon gets up the ranks in the system and moves out to this new company where he has to exclusively speak in his white voice. And that part, the whole like disguising of voices in this movie and what is constituted as black voice and white voice is incredibly troubling in this world, and how no one how prejudiced people can be just solely on one's voice. And and obviously delving into the topic of race is what this movie does eloquently, and it's one of the most diverse casts I've ever seen in a movie. Furthermore, you have at the same time you have him trying to balance his relationship with his girlfriend, played by Tessa Thompson, who sells art, and as he gets more powerful in the voice community, she starts to see his flaws and starts to distance herself from him. And at the same time, as Cash goes up in the the ranks of the voice community, where on the side there's just this company that's been having some suspicious dealings with experimentation. And this is where it gets interesting. This is the main part of the movie that I find the weirdest and almost takes me out of the movie. But I appreciate the metaphor they're going for, in that we're introduced to Army Hammer's character, who's this businessman and likes to party a lot, and almost so much so that he has drugged people and experiment on them to turn them into almost or into a human horse hybrid known as the Equisapiens. And we're we're met with this revelation alongside Cash's reaction with the utmost amount of disturbance, like and sympathy. You certainly you feel so badly for the people who were experimented on for this cause, and it was for selfish reasons. I feel like this movie is very topical, whether it focuses on race or exploitation of other people, or even how flawed internet culture has become, or meme culture has become. And it really does an eloquent job at doing so. And I think this is a very important movie that, while also having some comical parts to it and wholesome parts to it. Number 9 is The Adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, a movie that I had very low expectations for, that completely exceeded my expectations, to say the least. A, what is about three transvestites in Australia who go on a venture into the Australian outback, and we're introduced to them, and The mo- whole concept of transvestites and their culture is perplexing, but they don't care what other people think. This is their occupation, and they choose to live life to the fullest. And particularly, the three main transvestites we're introduced to, Bernadette, Mitzi, and Felicia, are all all have conflicting personalities and all have pretty inherent flaws. I mean, having fulfilled so much success as drag queens, they get a inflated head and develop somewhat of an ego. But when they're met with this Australian small town where they're not used to people dressed up so flamboyantly, they have a change of heart, and once they get to know these people as more than just drag queens. And I really think this movie delves into the themes of accepting people whom are generally looked down upon in society, and while also looking at other groups that have experienced the same kind of prejudice, such as Aboriginals of Australia. And there's a lot of really touching moments in this movie, and very wholesome moments, and there's a lot of great character development as well, with particularly Hugo Weaving's character. Only his motivations lying in pleasing his son, and along with Terrence Stamp's character Bernadette being uncovered as going undergoing transgender surgery, and not to mention Guy Pearce is just himself. I mean, he's unrecognizable in this role, and I don't know how this movie has not received more traction. It's generally one of the best Australian films, or even just films I've ever watched. It's so mesmerizing, and the cinematography is breathtaking. Number 8 is V for Vendetta, another movie with Hugo Weaving, which he plays the main role of the anti-hero V. And this movie is not too dissimilar from the Adventures of Priscilla, in that we have characters who share the same kind of feelings of being shunned by society and having to rebel as a result. And particularly, we're introduced to this character Evie, who's on the run and at the start of the movie is tracked down by a group of men, where all of a sudden she's saved by V, and whom takes a liking to her. And obviously, as this movie is set in a dystopian world, it's everything. The government has taken control, and it's almost a uh, situation comparable to that of 1984, which I find it ironic that John Hurt plays almost the big brother in this movie, looking down upon the people tracking down V. But obviously, V has gained inspiration from the historical gunpowder plot of 1605, that attempt by Guy Fawkes, and as a result wears a Guy Fawkes mask to hide his identity. And when we see him, he's such a menace. He's almost unstoppable, and we think of him. We don't think of him as human. We think of him as a as a guardian angel. Particularly, the one scene that stands out to me that really showcases humanity is when he takes off his mask, and we see that of all his scars and his burns, and we realize that he had been in an institution, been locked away in an institution, and had committed arson to free himself and free all of the other inmates who were wrongly imprisoned, as there was a massive virus not that wiped out most of the country and the world, turning the country into what it is now, a shell of its former self, and something that is that contradicts everything that the that their democracy built upon. And in his plot to blow up Parliament is to send a message that they will not tolerate this kind of rule. And every part of this movie is beautifully shot as well. They really get down the whole comic book aesthetic of the movie. And while V doesn't have any supernatural abilities, he's a real hero in this movie, and he has goals, and he develops a character arc in caring for Evie. And even though he locks her away and tells her that she can't leave for a year, he's only doing it to protect her. And he develops almost a father-daughter kind of relationship with her. And for that, I think that's very genuine. And overall, this is a great movie that I watched in honor of Guy Fawkes Night last year.
Remember, remember the 5th of November, the gunpowder, treason, and plot. I know of no reason why the gunpowder treason should ever be forgot.
Number 7 is Snowpiercer. Now, you might be noticing a trend in some of the movies that I've had so far on my list, and with sharing the theme of taking place in the future, or characters who are limited from achieving a specific goal. And this movie in particular, Snowpiercer, is very similar to the latter in V for Vendetta, in which it takes place in a dystopian future where humanity is all but perished due to an attempt to stop global warming that failed. And as a result, they're now on a train which is separated by a class, with the lowest class at the back of the train receiving the worst treatment, and the elites at the front of the train. And particularly, we're introduced to Curtis Everett, played by Chris Evans, who's at the back of his, at the in the lowest class, and is subjected really poorly as a result. But they end up finding a way to get to the front of the train through a series of events. I think the tone of this movie is really set when the attempt to ride against the controllers of the train, one of whom played by Tilda Swinton, and one of the members of the lowest class is tortured by having his arm placed outside the train, which freezes because it's so cold. That's just a eerie thought, not even thinking that, and it really shows that they have no tolerance for the descent that they show to the lowest class. And that's what this movie is really about. Like with Bong Joon-ho's other masterpiece and Parasite, this movie also delves into the theme of class. And I think what makes this movie a little bit better is these characters are a lot more relatable, and they don't go AWOL as much. They're just trying to do what they think is the right thing to do. And particularly as they venture to the front of the train, they encounter security on along the way, and the security of the train and other forces, and things go awry as the power goes on and off throughout their action, and some of their members end up succumbing and dying, such as incidentally John Hurt's character Gilliam, who was one of the masterminds behind the creation of the train, but had a disagreement with the leader of the train, known as Wilford, and whom they're attempted to go contact. And they eventually hold Tilda Swinton's character, Minister Mason, hostage and force her to help them take them to the front of the train. But as they attempt on their way, they're encountered by this class, and particularly this teacher who ends up just casually pulling out a AK-47 and killing most of their group, including Octavia Spencer's character, who is the whole reason that they're going to the front of the train in the first place, because her son was wrongly taken away, and as they're attempting to indoctrinate the children into believing a flawed history of the world. And I think in that sense, this movie is really like with Sorry to Bother You. It delves into the themes of class and race, obviously, as you see how discrepant the gap is in how most minorities are living in the lower classes, and as we gradually see the how imbalanced the elite are. And even the scene where they showcase what the lower class actually eat is it gives me it sends shivers down my spine, because it's almost a there it turns out they're eating insects or some other kind of mealworms or something like that, and while the lead are eating like the filet mignons, and it's obviously not fair at all. And obviously Curtis ends up meeting Wilford, and and Wilford says to him that he can take control of the train, but Curtis refuses, and then Curtis discovers that Tanya's son, played by Octavia Spencer, is working down below the train, and these children are now being forced to work as child laborers, and was a shocking revelation. And so he gives the child to one of the members of his squad, and when the train blows up, the only two remaining people are Tanya's son and Yona, and they're just left to fend for themselves as they discover that the world is habitable, unlike contrary to what they were told, and what is an ambiguous ending. and and we also then we see a polar bear. Now we don't know whether the polar bear ate them or they ended up repopulating the planet somehow, but it really goes to show that it really just goes to show the humanity in us, as we and how we sometimes lose it in our attempt to create this facade of a class system, and how it even tracks even goes back to thousands of years ago. It's always been the case, and it's incredibly unfair, but it's just how we operate, and it is just so captivating in how Bong Joon-ho puts it to screen. And last but not least for today, as I will do a part two in a couple days to separate it out, is Uncut Gems. A movie that I also, like with Priscilla, had very low expectations for. And you would think that a movie with Adam Sandler wouldn't be that, would be hard to take him seriously in a dramatic role. But holy, he knocked it out of the park with this movie. And particularly, I mean, first of all, in A24, almost every A24 movie is made with such high quality and has such a compelling story as well to it. And it's almost Shakespearean in it. And I think I would call this a tragedy if we're going on his standards, as Howard Ratner is a jewel collector and seller out of New York City, and who's achieved an immense amount of success in his dealings, such as owning the NBA championship ring of Kevin Garnett specifically. But what his piece de resistance is this African gem, which is incredibly rare, and we're introduced to it at the beginning of the movie being mined, and for which he is set to acquire. Meanwhile, he also has had these uh, negative business dealings with these two, well, what we perceive to be mob members, and we soon realize they're up to no good. And while Howard's not a necessarily good guy, he's also just trying to make a living. and that's really what you have to do in this kind of occupation. And he's insisting on acquiring this uncut gem, the black opal. And while we have some filler time in there with them going to a party and the weekend shows up and they're doing all kind of rich people things, snorting cocaine, the usual. They end up going to auction for this black opal diamond, but it turns out the diamond was worth less than what they had bid for it, which they bid over $1 million. And so Howard is obviously dissatisfied with this revelation, and this is where things start to unwind for him and really not go his way, as the goons from before are, or the hitmen, I guess, are attempting to kidnap him and tell him that he has to do what they say or else they will kill him. And when you hear that kind of those kinds of threats, the stakes are really high. In return for lending the championship ring, Howard is planning to give the black opal diamond to Kevin Garnett, and and he's so and while also he's a avid gambler, he's been betting on Kevin Garnett to perform well, as this takes place in 2012. And particularly what I was so invested in was seeing the game play out as the Boston Celtics were in the midst of a playoff series between the with the Philadelphia 76ers, of which they ended up winning. And he bets it's a considerable amount on the Celtics winning. And while his girlfriend goes to the casino to deposit the money, and he goes to watch the game at his shop. But these other two goons have shown up too, and so but he locks them in his his glass uh his glass door, and so they're trapped in the door while also watching the game. While we watch the game play out, we also see at the same time his girlfriend dep- depositing the money and then eventually leaving the casino, as more people are on the way to recover their money, because it's a very tense situation. Like, I mean, it's palpable, and you really you really feel for what's going to happen next. And when the Celtics win, and Howard is ecstatic as a result, he does the fatal thing of opening the door to which the two mobsters, and I mean I can't, I don't know if I can spoil it, but and just it's a tragic end to his life. And while he was not a very likable character, he was, we sympathized with him in that he was just trying to do what he believed was right. And he won, and at the end of the day, even though he paid the fatal price, he won the game. And he won the game of life, and that's all you can say in that situation. So anyway, that's my first part of my list, movies 10 to 6, and as will unveil my final movies 5 to 1 to build the anticipation. Arrivederci.